Okay, so we'll start. We'll have people joining us later. It will be great. If not, it's wonderful to see all of you here, and it's Tov, and hello to the people that are listening later to the recording or watching us on YouTube. As I say every time, I invite everybody to, if they want, open their mics wherever they feel like they have a question or comment or anything, or you can also ask on the chat. The source sheet was sent on the WhatsApp group, and I'll share the screen soon. So you'll see it, but if you're only listening or anything, you can print it or watch it elsewhere. We'll do today, as I wrote, we're going to talk about Judaism between the Far East and the West. So today we had this amazing peace agreement, but it was with the Near East, let's say. So when I'm saying East, I'm not talking about the Middle East, I'm talking about India and Hinduism or China and so on. I want us to first, before I share the source sheet and we'll delve into study, I want us to very quickly to say, why is this relevant when we're talking about postmodern Judaism or postmodernity and Judaism? We need to understand that once we embraced our own faith because of the reality of the world, because of how we actually believe theologically, because of any reason we have, our faith as a narrative, meaning as a story, then immediately we also noticed that there are other stories, right? We always knew there are other religions. It's not something new. But we acknowledge the fact that other narratives are true for their own believers. It doesn't mean we believe in it, but we need to relate to it differently. That's what postmodern enables us to do, or asks us to do. Depends if you believe in it or you just experience this as a malasot reality. And when we are looking at Western philosophy or on philosophies of Hinduism or Buddhism or Zen, then we need to understand what those narratives mean to us. Okay, and that's different when we are looking at it in different times and in different eras. So it was a bit vague, but it was an important comment before we start. So I want us to begin. I'm sharing the screen to the source sheet. I hope everybody could see it. I want us to begin with the Declaration of Mutual Understanding. This is an amazing document, very much almost unknown, I would say, in Jewish circles, in Hindu circles, in Frum circles. It's an amazing document with amazing implications halachically that had mamash meaning, events that took place. I don't know if you remember a few years ago, around 2008, or if you remember reading about it, there was a big thing of burning wigs in Haredi circles, wigs that came, women, right, women peot, right, that came from India, and they found out that the hair that was used was hair that was taken in Hindu rituals. So they burned. There was like big burning in all sorts of different Haredi areas in Israel and in New York, mainly. And then, why is it happening? They always knew where the hair is coming from. That was a reaction to the fact that other circles said Hinduism is okay. So to demonstrate Hinduism is not okay, it's still avodat elim, still something we need to avodah zarah, then we had this reaction. So this is a document that was produced after almost a few years, some say maybe more than a decade, depends who you ask. I mean, where is this? Do you begin to draw the line of interreligious dialogue that was practical between Judaism and Hinduism. There's a lot of that on Rav Professor Alan Brill, if you know him. He has a book about Judaism in India, so he taught there and he speaks about this, and there are other authors that spoke about it. But in any case, what happened in 2007 is that there was a conference following, of course, a lot of negotiation and a lot of discussions, theological, halachically and philosophically, and between mostly the people that are associated with the Chief Rabbinate, with the Rabbinate Halachik from Israel, people that are in the vicinity of that from England, the Chief Rabbinate in England, and as also from North America, people that are linked to but don't have an official position in that stage, right, 13 years ago, within Orthodox circles in the States. And so not people from the fringe, people that are mainstream centrist Orthodoxy coming and speaking. And I'm starting with this and not with Rav Shagal that we'll read soon, because I think it's crucial to understand that what we're speaking about today and the reaction of Orthodoxy, of Orthodox Judaism to Hinduism is different and has changed dramatically in the past 25, 30 years, and we are unaware of it, almost. So I'm reading a bit. Sorry. Okay. The participants affirm that their respective tradition, I'm reading here, teach faith in one supreme being, who is the ultimate reality, who has created this world in its blessed diversity, and who has communicated divine ways of actions for humanity, for different peoples in different times and places. Okay? This is amazing, because what it means is that Hinduism is not Avodah Zarah. It's not Avodah B'Shituf. It's not Avodah that is not Abrahamic, let's say, okay? Or if we're today, maybe I'm affected by this, Abrahamic Accords, but it's not monotheistic. It's something we can actually, mamash, see as Islam, okay? When we are doing to Hinduism what we did with Islam about, let's say, 700-800 years ago, when we said Islam is not Avodah Zarah, and now we're doing the same. And what some rabbis tried to do in the beginning of the Renaissance in Italy with Christianity, an attempt that never formulated within mainstream rabbinical tradition, but it's happening. Okay, so that's a huge statement, because it means, for example, you can enter a Hindu temple and it's not forbidden. It means that you can eat at a house of your friend that is Hindu, naturally, if it's kosher, even if there's a statue of Shiva or something on a pedestal somewhere in the room. Okay? And that's something that's crucial to understand, because it's not self-evident. I see Daniel is smiling. I'm not sure you're smiling because of the statue, because of the dinner, or because of something else, but if you have something to say, I'll be...
The statue.
Ma?
The statue.
The statue. Okay, so I want us to continue here. I'm skipping a bit. You can delve into this document later. There's a lot of amazing stuff here. Both the Hindu and Jewish traditions affirm the sanctity of life and aspire for a society in which all live in peace and harmony with one another. Accordingly, they condemn all acts of violence in the name of any religion or against any religion. Okay? And this is coming from, again, I'm speaking religiously now, not politically. Basically, there are only two countries we know as historically of Jewish communities that never ever experienced any form of anti-Semitism. And those are the communities in India and the community in China. Okay, and it's very interesting. Now, the community in China disappeared in the beginning of the 20th century, the end of the 19th century, and the fractions that remained disappeared. What today exists in China are new communities. The communities in India maintained themselves until 1948. Okay. עכשיו, when you say this in a religious setting, when you claim that those traditions are non-violent and so on towards each other, then you are basically recognizing security and safety within one another. Okay, it's something very important because what we aspire to traditionally is a sense of safety and security for our practice. And so it's not only about politics, okay? It's also about how you maintain your safety within your religion. And we'll see later in Rav Shagar, and we'll see about in a second in Rabbi Nachman, how this plays out for us religiously. The representatives of the two faith communities recognize the need for understanding one another in terms of lifestyle, philosophy, religious symbol, culture, etc. They also recognize that they have to make themselves understood by other faith communities. They hope that through their bilateral initiatives, these needs will be met. Okay? Now, this is huge because basically it means that we need to teach ourselves as religious Jews about the philosophy, the religious symbols, and the culture of Hinduism. Okay? In Sephardic, Mizrahic yeshivot, right, until the 18th, 19th century, with everything changed with modernity, but until then, the Quran was taught within the yeshiva, not as a religious text that we need to understand because it is a divine word of Allah or something, but it was taught because there was a conscience, there was an understanding that Islam is not Avodah Zarah, and we need to understand the religious setting of Islam. Okay, it almost disappeared in modernity, regardless to politics, it disappeared because suddenly learning other religious texts gained different meanings. But the understanding that we need to understand Hindu text religiously is again an attempt to create Hinduism into something that is more similar to Islam as we see it today, as something that is not Avodah Zarah. And again, I'm not talking about political side of Islam and Judaism and everything that happened since, let's say, the end of the 19th century and Zionism and all of that. I'm putting that aside because that's irrelevant for this discussion here. Okay, so this is about the statement as a setting for what we're going to talk about. Any question, comments until now? Okay, so what I want us to go to now, I want us to see how that plays out. Okay, so I'm again in the source sheet. And this is this is from an article between East and West, Ben Mizrach leMa'arav, Shel Rav Shagar, that was published in Luchot v'Shivra Luchot. This is a translation. Okay. In any case, so I'm reading. I won't read all of the text, but it's in front of you, so you can see it. And if you're listening to us onto the recording, the text, the source sheet is on the WhatsApp. This duality, one which lies between Eastern unity and Western dualism, can be found in Rabbi Simcha Bunim of Chischa discussion of the sin of the first man, Adam HaRishon. And the Lord God said, now that the man has become like one of us, knowing good and bad, Yodea Tov v'Ra, good and bad, what if he should stretch out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever? Okay. I heard from my master, father, and Rabbi Umori, that before the sin, Ifnechet Adam HaRishon was so deeply engaged in understanding godliness that he did not feel that he himself was independently thinking and achieving such a level of understanding. And he perceived all his energy and sensation consistently in this way. The service of righteous people, avodat tzadikim, okay, is directed to this lofty level, one of true ayin. Ayin, not an eye, right? Ayin, haklum, nothingness, self-nullification. Yet after that, the sin, Adam, can man, tumble from these great heights and suddenly felt that he himself was one reaching and achieving. So now we're not looking how God is doing this, we're trying to do it ourselves. This is the meaning of like one of us. Previously, he had been one with God, but now they were like two separate beings. Okay? And he ate. This is Gashmiyut, materialism. And live forever, this is spirituality, a combination of good and evil. Total. But the Mashiach will be in that primal state prior to the sin, Tromachet. And all tzaddikim, righteous people, cannot balance a position of being on the pre and post sin, ifnei ve'achrei hachet, level simultaneously. But the Mashiach will inhabit both levels at once. Okay, uninterrupted. I'm skipping a bit. I'm over here. We can thus say that the difference between East and West represents the two poles of human nature. On the one hand, man is inseparable from the greater being, full of humility, man before the sin. And the other hand is the position man has chosen, embodying the sin of choosing, and the selfish I will rule, ani eshlot, man after the sin. On a deeper level, we might suggest that the tension between the two cultures can be expressed as the difference between the will to return man to a pure, simple pre-sin state, as part of a unified being on the one hand. So we want to become like God, the same. We want to return to that. And we'll continue eating from the tree of knowledge to turn man into a God who rules over the world on the other hand. Yet this latter desire, as it gains ground, will only lead to frustration. Okay, I'm skipping. We find that the Torah cannot be positioned at either one of these poles, neither by Western independence and dualism, nor by Eastern self-nullification and unity. Now, Pshischa suggests a third option, one that resolves the sin of the first man without restoring the initial pre-sin oneness. The Eastern desire, this is the crucial point. The Eastern desire for nothingness through complete integration is not an intended level, but a synthetic ideal, turning the ego awareness itself into a part of a divine reality. The separation between the subject and the object, and between the subject and the object and God, established on the one hand the consciousness of modern freedom, but on the other creates modern alienation and loneliness. It seems that Judaism does not advocate the blurring of the boundaries between the subject and the object, but it opposes the objective alienated perception of reality. Okay, I'll pause here because we read already too much, or at least more than I planned in the first reading. In any case, what Rav Shagal is saying here is that we have those two poles. We have a line, a spectrum. On one hand, Eastern philosophy asks us to return to this Adam HaRishon state, right? Without eating the Etz HaDaat, the tree of knowledge. Trying to reach a level where we are one with God, with Hashem, by basically canceling ourselves. So when we are looking at the moral of many of the stories within Hinduism, within Buddhism, and in all sorts of different Eastern religion, the idea many times, and I'm not suggesting I'm a theological expert on Eastern religions, I'm just paraphrasing what Rav Shagal is saying here. is that we need to ignore ourselves as human beings or ignore our human state and attain only a spiritual level because we want to be one with our God. On the other hand, on the other end of the spectrum, Western philosophy asks us not only to maintain Etz Hadat, but to keep eating from it all the time until we become God ourselves, like Nietzsche. Okay? Those are the two spectrums, or the two ends of the spectrum. Judaism, Rav Shagari is saying, is a third option, is not on the spectrum at all. Okay? Judaism does not ask us to choose between ourselves and God. Neither it asks us to continue to eat until we become God. It asks us to disregard this objective reality of human versus God. Okay? We don't want to negate ourselves, but we also don't want to make ourselves into a divine being and to pretend we are gods. We want to look on ourselves, right, a bit from the outside, and look on our journey a bit from the outside. Any questions so far, or comments, or things that are unclear, or are you even with me? Everything understandable. Where are you before we continue with this, so we understand it?
I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about what sin would mean in the Eastern religions.
What do you mean? What is the Chet Adam Harishon of the Eastern religions?
Yeah.
So their sin or their perception, I'll put it this way, Rav Shagar's perception of their perception of Adam Harishon, okay, is that maintaining a human attributes to the world is the sin. Meaning, we are building a civilization that is secular, okay? That is gashmit lachalutin. And in order to reach ruchaniyut, to reach spirituality, we need to avoid that gashmiyut. In Eastern religions, Rav Shagar would say, the sin would be not to go to the place of spirituality, okay? To maintain gashmiyut alone, okay? So their solution to the sin was to create this differentiation between man and God and to try to alienate our physical being, okay? Because they are aware to the fact that it's Chet Adam Harishon is on all of us, it's on all humanity, it's not a Jewish aspect. And their solution was to separate themselves from the physical being, okay? But it's coming with a price, and that's what he's criticizing. Am I answering your question? Excellent. Any other comments, questions? Okay. It should be said, I'm reading, that the Jewish path is based on confidence and trust in God rather than nullification. Personal qualities and worldly consciousness do not disappear, but rather faith is injected into them. The highest level is not the negation of the I, but rather the attainment of the level of the soul where the I is included in the divine unity. I'll read this sentence again because it's a bit complicated. The highest level is not the negation of the I, but rather the attainment of the level of the soul where the I is included in the divine unity. The goal of Judaism is not nirvana, at least not in this world, but rather the ability to live in the world in Jewish happiness and trust. While both the Hindu nirvana and the Hasidic equilibrium aim for enlightenment, the latter uses very particular means to a similar end. Within Judaism, throughout the process, man remains in all of his concreteness, the muda'ut. We do not give up this world. We do not surrender our history or our sense of national belonging. Unlike Zen Buddhism, Hasidism nurtures a human with a particular identity, one who belongs to a history and a specific society. Meaning, even in places where we try to differentiate ourselves from the Gashmiut, from our physical being, and that exists. It exists and it's positive, right? Friday is going to be Rosh Hashanah. I don't know how it's in the States with COVID and davening in Rosh Hashanah and what the regulations, but in Israel, we are going back to quarantine on Friday afternoon. So there won't be huge tefillot, or you can't go to the mikveh. There's a lot of things you can't do. But nevertheless, we aspire to gain some sort of spiritual davening. That what we're trying to do on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur more than ever is to be in a spiritual place. Okay? It's a long service and we pray hard and it's good. However, our tefillah, our matbeh lashon, our memories, and in Rosh Hashanah it's very visible, right? Zichronot, Shufarot, right? We do things that are concrete, not only in our meditative space, but in mamash, our history. So we try to reach a place that is spiritual and is not physical, but is still concrete. Concrete maybe on history, concrete maybe on the kehillah, on the kahal, on our nation or on our neighborhood. It doesn't really matter, but it's not about separating ourselves from a physical being. It's rather separating ourselves from our own immediate conscience. Okay, it might look similar, but it's very different from reaching nirvana or reaching Zen and so on. Questions or disagreements with this either description or this attributes that we're trying to attain?
I have a question. So the sentence, the highest level is not the negation of the I, rather the attainment of a level of the soul where the I is included in divine unity. Mm-hmm. Is there like I guess in order to do that, you still have to hang on a little bit to the I as separate, right? But then realize that the I is not really separate. And within Judaism, that's also an element, right? It's not just setting yourself aside completely as like, I'm a Jew, I'm part of Am Yisrael, and then not having a personal identity beyond that. You'd still need the personal identity to get to that level, no?
Yes, but I think there's a difference that I would put it this way. I think the difference, I'm not sure how each of you and of the listeners is focused or thinking when he's talking about sfirot, okay? And the different sfirot we have within our Jewish life. I don't want to go too much into this Keter, Malchut, and so on, and all sorts of different places. But I think we have, and for those of you that have studied the Ramachal, for example, then there are different levels of I in Judaism, right? And I'm sure it also exists in other religions, by the way. I only speak about what I know and what my life is, so I know Judaism. But there are different levels of I, and there are also different I's, meaning Haneshama HaTachtona, Neshama HaElyona. There are different levels within our Neshama. There's a Neshama be'olam HaBri'ah, be'olam HaYetzirah, we might even talk about Olam HaAtzilut. So there are all sorts of worlds, and there's all sorts of level and steps that are so that the I is either ascending in tefillah or descending into our physical body. And either we look at it from above or from our perspective, it's a different manner. Okay, and that's one. The second aspect is if you read Ramak, there's just a very known paragraph where he's basically saying, כל נשמות ישראל כלולים אלו באלו. זה בתוך זה, זה בתוך זה. זה בתוך נשמת חברו, זה בתוך זה. זה בתוך נשמת חברו, I don't remember the exact quote. Meaning, each of the I of myself is also including within it every segments or parts of all the neshamot of the different people of Am Yisrael. And each of that segment also include a sub-segment of all of the neshamot that are including that person into infinite. Okay? So, and each of us also, and everybody else also including myself and all the things that are included within me. So there's the I is not only affecting myself, it's also affecting everybody else. And also when I'm trying to focus on the I and to basically separate myself from my physical being, I must also remember, at least within the Hasidic framework, which we talk about right now, right? Because he's talking about then we need to understand that there's a communal I. There's an Am Yisrael sort of sense of belonging. Ken, Aviel, is that answering your question? So, okay. So I want us to go and see a bit on practical. What's happening in practice? What is happening when we're taking, I wouldn't say rituals, but maybe habits from Hinduism? Okay, can we do that? What is that? What can we learn, mamash? If we assume within postmodernity that every religion sees itself as true and their narrative is true for themselves, and we need to acknowledge it, it means I can learn something from that narrative, even if I disagree with it. And certainly, if I think that narrative is also holy and is speaking about God. Okay, so this is from Rav Shagar's book, Shiurim al Likutei Moharan. And this is from Torah number 8, Torah Chet Shel Rabbi Nachman. See how precious is the sigh, ha'anacha, okay? And the groan, the krechts, the okay? Of a Jewish person. It provides wholeness in place of the lack. For through the breath, which is the ruach of life, the world was created, as it was written, and by the ruach of his mouth, their entire hosts were created. The renewal of the world will also come about by means of the ruach, as in, you will send your ruach, they will be created, you renew the face of the earth. This ruach is also the vital force of human life. This is because of man's breath in his life force. Whenever a lack exists, it is essentially in the life force, which corresponds to the ruach of life, nishmat chaim, ruach of that thing. This is because it is ruach which gives that thing its existence. And sighing is the extension of the breath. Okay, I'm skipping a bit. Rabbi Nachman opens this Torah with the topic of man's spirit and breath. He begins with the basic principle. Everything has a spirit which manifests that thing's living being in the present, an energy that is sustained and guarantees the thing existence. Okay? Indeed, in our lives, there are times when the Spirit fills us and we experience the liftings of the Spirit. Other times we feel out of spirits, our strengths depleted. The Spirit and body are bound together in an intriguing way. Those sensations of the presence or absence of Spirit are connected to a dimension of consciousness. Okay? I'm skipping a bit. One of Rabbi Nachman's special traits, and this Torah and others, show in his belief that spiritual problems can be rectified through physical means. Such ideas are uncommon in Judaism, and indeed they may sometimes be compared to approaches we recognize from the East. The West deals with the external body, cultivation of physical strengths, but the East concerns itself more deeply with the body's energy, facilitating work on high levels of consciousness. Okay? What does that mean? We are brought up, and that's definitely true when you live in a Christian-dominated religious public, meaning that your religious attitude and thinking and terminology is rooted within Christianity, even if you are Haredi, right? If your society around you is entirely Christian, then your understanding of the religious world, that your language, terminology is rooted in Christianity. And that, and Christianity and the West in general, is separating that. But the East, the very language, and definitely the rituals, is connecting, okay, about the body's energy, okay, into consciousness through all meditation, through yoga, through all sorts of Tai Chi, and all sorts of different, I wouldn't say rituals, but I would say something like Hanagot, maybe we would say, we'll call it in Hebrew. I'm not sure what the English phrase will be. Among the topics taught in the wisdom of the East, and especially in yoga, is the ability to control the breath, the flow of energy to our body, to the body. One approach, the pranayama, is concerned wholly with the process of breath in length, depth, and other qualities, and is informed by recognition of the breath importance and its connection to the awareness and thoughts of men. For example, when a person is focused on something and observes it in a concentrated, direct way, his breath may stop, right? We're gasping. The breath and man's state of awareness are connected, okay? Whether the breath is shallow or deep, in throat or the nose, all of these qualities are important and revealed. In the East, the breath and its components are seen as an experiential discipline that requires exercise. Similarly, Rav Nachman starts this Torah by connecting the breath and the spirit. Okay, neshima v'neshama. Okay, neshima v'neshama, and suggests a kind of exercise for following the breath with a sigh, in a physical sense. Usually, the activity of tikkun happens in mind space of awareness, an internal work, avodat hamidot, tikkun atzmi, right? Yet in this Torah, Rav Nachman suggests a path of tikkun that begins from the outside rather than the inside. Okay? Breathing. Now, I'm not sure which yeshivot you are studying at or which shul are you going to and so on. But in Israel, or at least not in Israel, that's not true. In segments within the Tilumi sector in Israel, and also separately, but very connected, in the Chiloni society within spiritual circles. The idea of neshimot and the connection between neshimot and avod neshama, meaning being aware to your soul, to your ruach, by virtue of breathing, is something that was, when I was younger, when I was in high school, was like the huge trend. Everybody were doing that in every place. Okay. Today, it's less trendy because it already became internalized into the way we work. My daughter is I have a daughter in elementary school. It's a mamlachti dati, a regular religious, dati school in Jerusalem. Every morning before Tfilat Boker, they get up and they dance slow motionly to Hasidic songs and breathing with teachers that are, regular elementary school teachers. Sometimes it's the English teacher, sometimes it's like the math teacher, whatever. And they're like regular teachers. Some of them are old, they've been there for 30, 40 years. So they're not new age yoga instructors. They are regular teachers. But they would do that and they would practice it. Okay, and they'll tell them, you don't breathe properly, you breathe properly because it's already internalized into formal education, right? Formality education. So you need to breathe now, breathe. So I'm laughing a bit, but seriously, it became so self-evident in our lifestyle. And I think it's in some level also starting to be in some circles that way in the States as well, and in other from areas. And definitely in the non-Orthodox world, it sifts faster. And that happens because we are taking this trait, we're taking this minhag from the East, and we're internalizing it. So of course we can find in Rabbi Nachman, okay, as Rav Shagar is putting here. In spiritual work, one ought to do tikkun through the body and keep progressing using other methods as well. In Chassidut, it is possible to find guidance for avodah through physical means, but they are relatively rare. Though Judaism has not engaged much with physical avodah, I see great importance in it and see no reason for discrediting it. I would say even more than that. If Rav Shagar is not discrediting it, we are already, and he's writing this 20 years ago, maybe even more. It's only published now, but it was written many years ago. Today, we're not only discrediting it, we are discrediting tefillah without breathing. We see people unaware breathing and internalizing their amidah, not by how they do tefillat amidah, but how their posture is, because we have internalized yoga motifs into our avodat Hashem. Okay, this is something that was unimaginable 40 years ago. Okay, nobody would even conceive that way. And when we're talking about Hinduism as something we can learn from, it's not only about theology, it's not only about philosophy, it's not only about declarations about religious tolerance. It has huge impact on how our religious life is happening, what is happening, what we do, how we do it, okay? So we can find in Rabbi Nachman, we are not inventing it, we're not taking this only from Eastern religion, but we are looking for it within Rabbi Nachman. And even there, it's not as strong as it is today in our lifestyle. Comments, questions, attacks. Okay, so I want us to finish with another piece. We won't read most of them, but we'll read part of it about translation. This is not a passage, this is from Layet Avtachim, and the language of translation. What does that mean when we translate something? And I want to say translation is not only literal translation, meaning I took these paragraphs from Rav Shagar, I gave it to a translator, she translated it, and I'm reading it with you. It's not only a translation from divine into human language, for those who are familiar with Rav Tzadok and other Hasidic Rabbanim that are speaking about Hebrew or any human thought as a translation from the divine. Okay, when we talk about Torah, not of any human thought in general, but holy thoughts or religious thoughts. But also translation as a cultural translation, meaning when we are taking a phrase like yoga or breathing or Zen stories, which are also something people talk about, and this. Oh, there was a. I remember a few years ago there was in the last cycle of the Daf Yomi, there was a page that was doing haiku yomi on the daf yomi. And haiku is also spiritual. It's not only a poetic sort of technique. It has spiritual meanings for the Japanese Shinto, for those who knows. So when we take those cultures, those habits, we're also translating something else. We're translating values, right? We're translating sets of objectives and so on. So I'm reading. The origin of the language of translation, on the other hand, is grounded in sin, the sin of the tree of knowledge, good and evil, through which the language was cut off from the holy language. Rabbi Nachman emphasizes the importance of enriching the holy language through translation. The development and wholeness of the holy language, Sfat HaKodesh, can be achieved by extracting the wickedness from Rishut, from the translation, and raising the good of the translation into the holy language. It is in this way that the holy language is made whole. This is amazing. A translation that is independent of the holy language, own creative production, lends a reflectivity and reflexiveness for one who would not intend to appropriate holiness in an instrumental, shallow manner. Rather, translation illuminates the letters of the holy language. It seeks to bring light to the spoken letters, not to conquer them. He is expressing the phenomena that the speaker of the language of translation is capable of, perceiving a spiritual wealth and strength within the holy language, Sfat HaKodesh, specifically by virtue of its external position. When you, as English speakers, specifically because you're native English speakers, are speaking Hebrew or reading Hebrew, you are bringing more Kedusha into Hebrew than somebody that is just reading Hebrew and doesn't know any other language. Lama. Yet the activity of translation does not end there. The language of translation initiates a transformation of the holy language itself, altering its first meaning, supplementing new associations and links. And this is the substance of building and making the holy language whole, a wholeness that illuminates the letters of the holy language. Meaning, we've lost a lot in our ability to reach holiness because of our human language, okay? We want to complete Sfat HaKodesh. And the only way we can do this is by adding more things to it, more attributes to it, more meanings, more cultures to it. But we don't know how to do it because we live within our Dalei Damot, within our frame. However, when we look from externally, when we look from the outside, and you have your English culture on everything that enables you to do, culturally, philosophically, politically, theologically, so on and so on. And then you translate this into Sfat HaKodesh for yourself, not as a Rav, not as an educator, but for yourself. Then you're implementing new, or at least more meanings into the words than they had before, because now they have another layer. So when we're adding something, when we're translating it, Sfat HaKodesh, from Sfat HaKodesh, or less Sfat HaKodesh, to Sfat HaKodesh, we are expanding it, okay? If you are speaking two languages, then reading a translation is never reading the same as the source. But it doesn't mean it's less interesting. Many times it's more interesting, right? It enables you to broaden the scope of your understanding. And the same is happening when we're translating a religious language of the East into the West, or of the West into the East. And as Judaism is somewhere interwoven or tangled between it, at least for now, then we can translate concepts from two unrelated philosophies that are not even talking to each other through our religious setting And by that, we are encompassing more than we could have done before that. I hope that was clear. Any comments or questions on that before we'll try to close?
Yeah, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So, like you were mentioning, it would be okay to eat at the person's house with a statue, but then, and like I've studied a bit about Hinduism, and I know that these statues actually are quite important. So, but then it sounds like in the version where you're taking out parts of it and you're enriching your religion, you're sort of, the Judaism, you're ignoring the parts that are potentially problematic, like the statue. So how do you decide if it's an honest representation?
Excellent. First of all, you can't. So there's a innate understanding that we are not holy yet, right? We still have that barrier. Rav Shadal was speaking here. I can't find now. Of we have eaten from it's that we have this barrier of chokhmah that we know, right? As you said, we know there are problems. What can we do? I mean, it's not, we can't ignore it. However, when we translate it, we can translate it into our set of values and our set of, when we translate a word, I'll give you an example. I was reading, no, I don't know, I don't remember the English name of it, one of Dickens' books. I found this book in our apartment, and it was printed in Poland in the 1920s, something like that. Okay, so I got it somehow in the family, a Dickens book in Hebrew, a Hebrew translation. But the Hebrew translation is not like they translate today Dickens books. It's a Hebrew translation from the 20s, so it's different Hebrew. It was translated for yeshiva bochers, okay, that lived in Poland in the 20s. So, and in that translation, it's amazing because all the characters are giving these idioms from the Talmud, right? Because he translated the British sort of sentences, and you know, when they're giving this something from Shakespeare or something from this, where today in modern Hebrew literature, they'll translate Shakespeare, right? Literally, they won't take something with a similar meaning. But back then, because they spoke to a crowd that didn't have cultural sort of resonance with British culture, but only immersed only in yeshivish, but they still wanted that crowd to be more aware of other cultures, then they translated it into their own idioms and sentences and so on. So then you have this amazing setting, which is practically, you know, a frum family strolling across England, of this orphan and all sorts of things. It doesn't matter now. But and when I was reading this, it was amazing to me because many times I knew some of the, I don't know everything by heart, right? But I knew some of those sentences and tefillot and things that they spoke about. And it gave me a different notion for that sentence. Even when I was rereading it later in Masechet Ketubot or Besidur or in things like that, right? Now, it doesn't mean Dickens meant that. I'm sure he never even imagined it to happen, okay? But what that enabled me is when I'm rereading those sentences within their original setting, it enabled me to broaden their scope, okay? Suddenly, they don't mean to me only that halachik discussion or this tefillah or whatever. It gives me also a connotation that is different from a Western sort of post-Victorian, I would say, literature kind of a cultural value, okay? At the same level, when we're taking a statue, or we're taking a Zen story, or we're taking yoga, or we're taking stuff like that, or meditation, or different, and that is not transcendental meditation, but is internal meditation, let's say, which is easier to internalize Jewishly, then I'm not only changing the meaning of them in order to use them, so I'll translate it, I'm also gaining new concepts, okay? Now, it's true that many times I won't be aware to a value that is maybe objecting, or maybe mechalel, or maybe, that is not something I want. And I'll translate it into my Jewish lifestyle, and I will walk with it. But I think, and that's where I'm going back to the first thing we read, the declaration, once we said it's not avodah zarah, it's not asur. Even if it's the name of the statue itself, mamash. Because suddenly it's not avodah zarah, okay? It's huge. It's similar to the fact that you can, if you have, again, I'm not going into political side with Islam and everything that's happening now, but originally, if we're looking in the Rambam and other scholars, in Muslim countries back then suddenly you can draw things from Islam that are profoundly rooted within Quran, or within Hajj, or within different commandments that Muslims have, or mitzvot, okay, in Sharia law, and you can take it as something that you can internalize, and it's not threatening to you. Now, it's true, it's a lot less, it's much more complicated when we talk about things that we know are not avodah zarah. So they are looked at avodah zarah, even today, like Shintoism, for example, in Japan, which is still problematic, at least from the people. By most scholars I know, I don't know a lot of people that address Shintoism as something that is like Hinduism, even though I'm sure those also exist. Or Zen stories that are profoundly rooted within mythological creatures. So there are things that are more tricky. But I think the challenge is how you translate it into your lifestyle or into your religion by by taking the attribute within it that you can still draw from. And this is very important to say, there are things you need to stay away from. There are still bad things in the world. There are bad things in the East, there are bad things in the West. There's chata'im, okay? There's chilul hakodesh. There's a lot of things that are bad that we don't need to go into. There's a lot of, in Eastern religion, or in present-day Eastern religions, there's a lot of very different social barriers between genders and between unmarried men and women that we don't hold by, or in terms of eating, and in many other ways, or in terms of how we relate to dead. So there are a lot of things we don't need. Translating, looking at something as something that's not avodah zarah, looking at East and West and things we draw from, doesn't mean we're taking everything. Similarly to the fact that Judaism that was rooted in the West until the 20th century, and is still rooted in the West, definitely Jewish communities in the diaspora that are living in the West, which is 90-something% of the Jewish communities in diaspora. It doesn't mean that they took everything from Christianity or from, German philosophies or whatever. Yes, they were influenced, of course, but they haven't took everything. I hope that answered your comment. And if not, then I apologize. I want to finish by just saying that I think that there's a reason the Chief Rabbinate, and there's a reason people that will later associate with RCA or OEU or the Chief Rabbinate in England that are very traditional, very frum organizations. It's not Yeshivat Siach or Rav Shagal or Yeshivot that are, we're doing all sorts of stuff and people, okay, there are these Mishugaim that are doing those stuff, okay, whatever. No, people that are from the centers, the fact that they're doing this is because there's a reality, and the reality is that in our postmodern time, not only we live physically Israel between the East and the West, but mentally we live there. Okay, there's a reason if you go to India, every second tourist is Israel. Okay, there's sort of a draw point, and we are attracted to something that, yes, is very dangerous religiously and socially, but is also something that we cannot ignore. And I think this translation is what the way or the method of Chagall is suggesting to us by through of Nachman's, of course, to take this into our lifestyle. So I hope this was interesting for the people that joined us. I hope it's interesting for the people that are joining us on YouTube or only listening to us later. Shana tova umetuka. May we'll be all have a healthy year, alevai, and we'll be able to meet in different settings and different manners. Shana tova.
Shana tova, thank you.
My pleasure.